but appreciate you being here. I'm gonna get the cans on now. We're gonna get started. So, Scott probably called me about doing this like middle of last summer, early last summer. I think it was like early summer, somewhere around like May. And it was crazy because he basically called me and went, "Hey," well, actually, he didn't. If we're gonna be technical, he didn't call me. He messaged me, and he said, "Hey, I've got a new project for you. I am doing a pitch to get a TV spot. I'm doing a pilot pitch to get a TV spot on G4TV." The moment he said that, I was like, hold the phone. G4TV? I have not heard that name in a long time. And I'm sure some of you either were not familiar beforehand, or if you're around my age or older, remember G4TV basically being the, like some of us remember G4TV, but it's like, it's a name from way back. So, when he said that, I was like, I almost had to do a double take. I was like, holy crap. Which then turned into me being absolutely so honored and amazed that I ran into, that I happened to get this opportunity, which huge shout outs yet again to Scott for making it happen, for giving me this opportunity. Because if I had like told my 12-year-old self, who, you know, I didn't like really watch G4TV much. I didn't watch much television. But I did skim past it many times, and G4TV was kind of like the way to get E3 news, like live coverage before like Twitch and whatnot. That was kind of like one of the main ways to get it. And so I remember getting a lot of live coverage gaming news via G4TV, you know, back in the late 2000s. And so if I think my mind would have been blown had I watched that. Had I been watching G4TV and me from the future came back and said, "Yo, you're going to be doing, you know, some music for G4TV later on." So anyway, it was really, really crazy. He basically was like, "Hey, I want to do this thing, yada yada." A lot of people pretty quickly picked up on a certain reference point, something that sounds similar to, which is the Scott Pilgrim video game music. That was in fact good catch. That was in fact, I get, maybe it's not a good catch. Maybe it's obvious as I'll get out, but that was one of the main reference points for the theme song. That was something that Scott was like, "Hey, I'd love for it to sound something like this." And so I use both that and like a little bit of influence of like, you know, your classic like Disney Channel, Nickelodeon like intro to come up with what I came up with. Little did I know, I knew that he was like essentially doing this because he couldn't use the song that he uses for YouTube for the intro for television. But I didn't realize how like integral it was gonna be, I guess. I don't know. I didn't really I knew, but I didn't, you know what I mean? So it ended up like, I think it was good that I didn't totally understand like the whole, like how important it was going to be, I guess, how integral, how much it was going to be a part of the show, because it kept me from feeling too much pressure of having to replace the original theme song. And you know, now I totally listen. I get like, I'm one of these people that obviously understands where like something's like, oh man, but I love the original. So like if people like the original, no hard feelings here. Like I totally get it. But I feel like I was able to write a better song that maybe is, you know, I at least to me personally, I feel like it is like it definitely can stand on its own versus, you know, the theme song that everybody is so familiar with. yeah, so anyway, all of that said, I wrote pretty much all of it on the piano. It's kind of one of those where, you know, I've said this before, it really is kind of a God thing. I can't really tell you how I come up with most of these things. It just kind of hits me. You know, but I do remember just kind of finding the melody and then just kind of letting my ears and my hands just kind of lead me, and that's how I got the melody. I can't give you any like perfect rhyme or reason. There's no like, oh yeah, I use this music theory. I never apply any of that ever. If I do, most of the time the song ends up sucking. This is not to say, as a quick disclaimer, this is not to say music theory is bad, because it's not. I actually do I know music theory because a lot of times it can help kind of exercise and stretch your brain, so that when you go back to doing crap where you're not deliberately thinking about it, there's kind of that subconscious stuff going on, or again, it's just exercising your brain in a way where oftentimes you can end up thinking and writing a little more clearly. All of that said, though, like I said, I wasn't really applying any of that. But yeah, I pretty much wrote all of it. You almost could like hear it as a nice little cute little piano piece. You know, before I haven't played in so long that I'm probably gonna totally blow it, but you know, I think it's the, you know, it's actually that. Right, I'm totally blowing it right now because I haven't played this like pretty much since I wrote it, but anyway, so it like I almost kind of wrote it like that. And then like hearing, but then like immediately being like, okay, now let's turn it into like a punk rock track with chiptune stuff going on, you know? So, but that's essentially how I initially wrote it. But, after that, I then get started, and I actually haven't listened to these in a while either. Yeah, so it was May. I'm correct. The first demo was dated the end of May. So here is the first demo. I think you guys will be able to hear this. I'm gonna double click on it, and it should open up in music. But yeah, it was all like MIDI at this point, right? Just demonstrating what I'm going for. So it was probably like really crappy MIDI guitars, fake drums, fake everything, right? See, okay, so it's very interesting listening to this back. Here we go. Yeah, and that reminds me, yeah, it's very, because it's all fake, it's very dinky. It sounds very, like, incredibly, like, old video game-ish at that point. But yeah, that was the very first demo. That's what I sent Scott to see, like, hey, this is the direction I'm going. You know, and you always have to be able to look beyond like just directly what it sounds like. You have to be able to be like, okay, so this is what he's thinking, but it's gonna sound like way better than that later on, right? So so yeah, that was all my program stuff that I wrote in, as you may have noticed at the end, the ending is not quite the same. That's it. It just ends like that, right? Joshua Typely, the guitarist on this track, he takes full credit for the ending as it turned out, which is the ba-da-da-da-da. So it's two sets of those staccato hits instead, right? So that was 100. Like Joshua was like, what if he was like, he suggested it as he started recording guitars. He was like, what if we had it go dun ga ba da da doom ba ba. And I was like, that's brilliant. We went with that, and then all the players like nailed their parts on top of that, which just made that ending super cool. But yeah, that was totally Joshua's idea. The other interesting thing is the chords at the end here. As this is very much me being a little out there. Right, so that's it's a whole bunch of fourths, right? Originally I wrote it as just like literally like yeah, so it was literally like just doing that heroic right, but I just felt like, I don't know, I guess I was screwing around. I don't really remember exactly what happened, but instead of going I ended up going like, hey, what if we did like which I don't even remember exactly how the chords went there, but it's a let me hear it again. See, I'm like having to re-diagnose my own crap. Yeah, so instead yeah, so it's those fourths instead. I literally don't even remember the chords I played here. And I'm not going to sit here and try and completely diagnose them again, but basically I just figured out on the piano something that I was like, hey, that's maybe actually a little bit more like, that catches the ear a little more and is a little more fun than just straight up go, which honestly, like, even this, which that was the thing, is I think the melody originally I had to go, right, and that would have been fine, but I guess I just I started messing around and I ended up deciding that I kind of like going between these fourths here. It's a little more interesting, without being so bizarrely out there that, you know, you'd end up with like, hey, too much jazz, man, you know what I mean? So yeah, anyway, that was the first demo. That's pretty much what I gave to the players, especially Josh. I believe he was the first one to do anything. Here's the second demo. I don't actually know the progression of like exactly what I finished before I sent a new version, so we're gonna figure this out together. So this is still before any real guitars. Yeah, there it is. So that was after I took Joshua's advice and I played in that thing. Yeah, it sounds so dinky. It's so stupid. It's so funny. But anyway, yeah, so that was demo 2. I think basically demo 2 was basically me just like like adding in some other chiptune crap. I think that's it. So then here's demo 3.1. Let's see what this sounds like. And there's Joshua. Still fake bass and drums though. See, already the energy is like lifted because, you know, now we've got some good guitars by good players. Shout outs yet again to Joshua Typely. Fantastic player. That was 3.1. I guess this was 3, so I guess we skipped one here, but my guess is it's probably not too much different then. Here's Work in Progress 4. And there's your drums. In fact, the real bass may be in there too now. That's still fake bass. That is my father, Scott Williamson, on the drums. You can also hear him playing drums on Closing In. He did the drums on the opening Christmas piece for Scott's latest Christmas special for 2021. And he also did the drums on Why Don't You Play Them. He's pretty much done all the real drums on everything that you've heard in Scott the Wad so far. That's real drums. So he also did the credits drums for the Christmas special for 21 as well. So anyway, that's Scott. Incredible. I mean, yeah, there's a reason that I'm able to do what I do, or at least, you know, I don't know. He's been an incredible mentor to me. Very, very talented guy. You know, I won't say that he taught me everything I know. I probably have taught myself most of what I know, but he has been obviously a remarkable mentor. And I only say this to basically say that I'm sure he would want to hear me say that I have, you know, learned what I've learned without, you know, that what's the word? Is it nepotism? Yeah, anyway, that's a total, I'm 100% ADHD, sidetracking and rabbit trailing. Dang, where's his brain going right now? I either need more coffee or less coffee. Can't tell which. Anyway, so yeah, after that okay, so here's what I was about to say. I was like, so pretty much Lewis sent me the bass and I just mixed it, but here's Work in Progress 5. So I'm assuming this is the one with his bass on it, so we're about to find out. He did do the drums on Hello Sun. That's real bass. And as you can notice, I actually put quite a bit more fuzz and like bass amp distortion on the bass here. Lewis felt it was a little too much and it was taken away from the slap. And I think he's right after listening back. I think it took away a little bit of the rhythmic slapping stuff that he did. Lewis is an exceptional bass player, for the record. You can hear him as well on the Alpha Rad outro. He played on that as well. Yeah, so that's basically it, and then it just became mix and master. So I'm gonna go ahead here and show you guys basically all the little tracks going on and what's happening, you know, under the hood. So here is, I guess we'll start with the synths, which is just the chiptune stuff. I'll go ahead and solo all of it for you. It's, you know, pretty basic stuff. I don't think any of it is unclear in the track, but so you can hear it by itself. So there you go. Yeah, I guess a few things to note. For anybody wondering where the sounds are from, it's Magical 8-bit. I am pretty positive. Yep. Magical 8-bit. As you can see, I've bounced down everything, so they're all audio files. But when I open up the hidden tracks, you can see the original MIDI that I was using here. But yeah, Magical 8-bit. A pretty classic and free plugin. Straight up, this thing is used. I'm pretty sure Mario Odyssey used it for like all the NES sounding stuff. It's pretty widely used and it's free. You know, you don't have a ton of control, but that's kind of part of the idea. It's essentially you're coming into this with the intent of it sounding like it's coming out of a Game Boy or an NES. So yeah, so that's what I used. You know, a key thing for any newcomers to chiptune stuff, a key thing to know is these are really basic, incredibly basic waveforms, right? So it takes a little bit more than perhaps, you know, your big crazy fancy sounding synthesizers to get them to sound alive and to get them to sound musical, right? And so a lot of that element, as I put it, is to make them sing. You've got to make them sound like they're actually singing. And so I've noticed with a lot of beginner people doing chiptune stuff that they miss this element, and it's important to figure this out, which is know your pitch bender. More than even the modulation wheel, I'd say, because the modulation wheel you can use for vibrato, but you can also use the pitch bender for like if you quickly pitch bend, you can use that as vibrato as well. So really know your pitch bender, but modulation also is great to also know. But those two things are going to pretty much bring it alive, bring it to life. So like as you can hear here, this is the main lead, right? So generally, if I were playing this any other kind of synth, I would probably just literally, instead of now this is also a personal approach, but in most cases I would do an accidental. I would do like I would do that, right? Instead of in this case, what you would do is you would go, and then you would pitch bend that up a whole tone, right? But that pitch bend, especially with chiptune, where it's just a pure waveform, it works out a lot better because it sounds a lot more. It honestly sounds more natural. It sounds a little bit more singable, right? Because everything is so instantaneous, I guess is a word we could use for it. With those chiptune, with those basic waveforms, doing something like this, while it sounds natural on a piano, sounds way less natural if you try to do that with like a saw wave or a triangle. So that's where pitch bending really comes into play. And then on top of that, the vibrato, which I believe in this case I am using the modulation because it has like a very continuous vibrato as opposed to a pitch bending thing, which is just a little bit more video gamey. It's a little bit, it sounds a little bit more like how it actually would have sounded, right? And then classic add in a melody, right? Or excuse me, a harmony. Right. And the deal here is, you know, it's really good to know how this stuff worked back in the day, right? So I am applying a lot of my knowledge of how chiptune music actually was written and applied back in the day, right? And one of those things would have been that you probably wouldn't have two synths of the same waveform, right? So if you've got a harmony, maybe make that either the square or make the lead the square and the harmony the saw. However, what I love about the saw wave as the lead is it's got a bit of a sharper and brighter sound to it, right? Especially if you do the pulse wave particularly, where basically you change it to either, you know, you've got a couple options here. The smaller the percentage, the sharper the sound. I'm not going to sit here and try and tell you that I know the exact science of this stuff. I sort of do, but I don't know it enough to be able to really explain it to you and make sense of it. But basically I can tell you that the smaller this number, the sharper, kind of the more shrilly the sound. But that can actually be a really great lead sound because it cuts through, right? But square waves have a bit of a rounder sound. And so I felt square wave would be great underneath as the harmony. And then as a counter melody there. And that's a great part right there too, where they actually slide in different directions. That's fun. But yeah, so you've got those two elements, and if you're on headphones or on good speakers, you will notice that the lead is like dead in the center. The harmony is not. The harmony, I'm actually pulling out like this using a sample delay, which basically I'm just delaying the right channel a little bit, and that gives you this stereo effect where it sounds like it's more out here, whereas the lead sounds like it's right here. Right, and then another classic thing, which is very video gamey, is to have these really, really fast arpeggiations, right? So I start off the track with, which I basically just wrote it all in MIDI. Not in a million years could I cleanly play that, and even if I did, it would be quantized up the wazoo because I'm trying to get the video game sound. We're not exactly trying to sound natural with the synths here. Right. So you've got, that's two parts if you want to hear them separated. Right, and then you've got the second one. Right, and again, this is like a pulse sawtooth wave, and this is a square. So you've got two different colors here combined. Right, there's another spot, and that's in this little. Let me play the whole track so you have context here. Right. And then again. Right, so you've got this, and it's just great because it helps like build up that final moment, because it's just rising and rising and rising and rising. Right, so you. Right, so then in the track. Right, so very cool, very video gamey, incredibly video gamey. Another thing was what I just literally called the bloop. And you can see that I pan between both ears with it. Very, very dinky and silly. And I stacked it with this little glockenspiel, which you can hear in a couple other spots here. Right, again, with the rest of the synths, so you have a little better context. Right, it's just all rising. We're really like setting it up for that final hit. The bloop thing, I actually, after Joshua sent me his guitars, he sent me this thing where in this little opening spot here, right? And you can hear it there. The guitars still do it. But never mind, that is incorrect. Where is it? Here we go, right here. This little like harmonic, like choking the guitar thing. Right. Very cool, and I thought that was like, oh, that's cooler to keep in that spot than the bloop. The bloop's stupid. Well, I dropped the bloop, and Scott went, no, please put that back in. And I think it was because I dropped it. I hadn't seen any of the visuals, and I didn't until like right before he actually like pretty much showed the whole audience at Too Many Games. It was only a few weeks beforehand, but he was like, no, he was like, I love that, and I worked like a thing with it. So he's like, keep it in. I was like, okay, whatever. And then I saw the thing, and I saw that it was like, and it was like with his wave, it did this freaking, and I thought that was the funniest thing ever. So I was like, okay, I get it. So yeah, we kept it in, obviously. So yeah, that's the synths. And then I'll go ahead. We'll get to the guitars here. So here's all of the. As you can see, probably the most of the tracks here are the guitars. Though I'm sure there's a lot of tracks for the drums as well, because that's usually how it goes. But you know, it's a very guitar heavy track. So here are the guitars, all the guitars together, but isolated. I'm actually missing the leads here. So let me play that part back with the lead. Yeah, Joshua Typoli, incredibly talented guitarist. You know, as you heard in the demo, I had a general idea, but he just pretty much took that and applied his amazing playing and creativity to create the guitars that you hear here. Yeah, I guess we could start by here are the lead guitars. And as you can actually see in the name, and I apologize if I butcher this. I actually don't know the proper way to say this, but he uses a digital amp for pretty much for everything, believe it or not. But in this case, it was a Soldano amp, which he loves. It's probably one of his go-tos. He loves the tone of it. He loves the way it sounds. It's just an emulation essentially of that amp, but digitally in the computer. So great player. So then here's what that harmony that he added in. Great little, again, like working with my chord progression there and really honing in on that voice leading, which is such an important part for anybody. An incredibly important part of the chords you choose is your voice leading. I think the best progressions are the ones where you can have a crazy chord, but it makes sense in context because of your voice leading. And that stuff just in almost every case never fails to fail. Never fails to fail. Never fails to, you know, be awesome, to sound great. Yep. So there's that. I had like programmed in this really crappy, and you probably heard it in the demo, but like this guitar octave thing where it's just basically just hitting the octaves of the chords, like whatever's the dominant note in that chord, whatever sounds the best over the chord. And so he just took that element and you know, did it. Which is very, very punk rock. This is very punk rock. It's very pop rock as well. It's kind of like pop punk, just, you know, it's very much like this. I would say this element right here might be the element that really gives this track the mid 2000s, early to mid 2000s like rock feel that I feel like it has. And what I love is that he took that and then he actually like accented in unison on that. Right, so he's hitting all these power chords here, but brilliant. Josh is so talented. So yeah, and anyway, yeah, so that's the octave pass. Yeah, I already showed you the guitar choking stuff. It looks like he added a couple other like just little extra effects here, transitional things. Can we hear it without the octaves? Yeah, sure, why not? So here's the track without those octaves. Well, here, just so you can hear like comparatively, here's with the octaves. All right, here's without. Right, like it's still got like, obviously still sounds like punk rock. It still sounds like pop rock, but something about like that octave thing to me, that's what like takes it over the edge. That's the moment that it's like, oh, okay, all right, you just took me back to 2004. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and it's not like obviously I don't have it like way at the front, because it's not the main, but it's like it's an added thing on top of the power chords that really adds a lot of excitement, you know. So you've already got like these really cool, great power chords, but with that octave on, with those octaves on top, you know, now it's just really exciting. It's just, that brings so much excitement into it. The other cool thing though is that like, and this was partially, it was both a production and a mix choice. To obviously the classic case scenario, classic thing to do, which is to pan to do two rhythm stacks, two rhythm passes, pan hard left, hard right, right? That's how you get so you get your guitars out here. Or your rhythm guitars, rather. But then putting the octave pass in the dead center. So now you've got this full spectrum of octaves, power chords, right? Yeah. Again, like I keep saying, fantastic player. I mean, it's, you know, exceptional player. He also sent me his delays that he used, which are on a separate track, so I have control of that. So like way back here, you can hear. Right, so that's way in the back. right, without it. Right, so cool little extra thing there. Same with he's got delays on these other tracks too that I also kept in, but since he bounced them separately, I had more control over them. Right. Off. On. Right. So yeah, so you got all of that. So that's basically your guitars. Yeah, again, all these delays and whatnot, but really, actually, once looking back, yeah, your main stuff here is these extra little effects tracks, I guess you could call them, right? That, like, that kind of weird crap, like here in context with the other guitars, right? Just an extra little. He's a very creative player. Yeah, and you got, I think they are also doing that kind of screamy sound you hear at the end. Yeah, very cool. But yeah, it's mainly just those. So you've got your rhythms, your octave, your leads, and then your extra little effects that he's throwing in there. And then these are just all like delays. So that's guitars. Again, Joshua Typely, incredibly talented guy. Yeah. So I guess next we'll go to bass. Lewis, and I'm probably gonna butcher your last name. I'm so sorry, sir. I don't think we've ever had to speak where I've actually had to talk about or said your last name, or you've said it to me. But Luis Almeida, it might be Luis yeah, I think it's Luis Almeida. But I could be totally wrong. It's Luis. In fact, I hope it's not Louis. It might be Louis. Almeida. Also exceptional. Listen, I got exceptional players on this. I only work with the best of the best. Okay. But I'm just gonna go ahead and let you listen to this all the way through by itself, because he is so good. He's so good. Mother Hubbard. Give me a break, bro. Give me a break. So yeah, that's the bass. As you can see here, there's two tracks. He's got his DI pass, and then the grunge pass, which I think is his I think this is the bass amp, and then this is just straight DI. So here's just straight DI. And then the grunge, quote unquote, the bass amp with extra fuzz on top. Oh, yeah. And this will probably get more into the mixing thing, but I actually did ride the faders here to really put focus on those slaps more in the DI, since that gives you the clean percussive tone, whereas obviously the fuzz amp does not. But yeah, so you've got, again, let me show you just DI, and then I'll add grunge on top. Yeah, so amazing player, really, really great. He sent me that, and I was like, that's perfect. It's perfect. I have no thoughts. Perfect. So yeah, there's not much more to say there. You know, there's not like a ton of tracks because it is bass. But absolutely incredible. Drums. And I guess we'll get back to bass once I start kind of breaking down the mix here in a little bit. But here are the drums by themselves, which again, Scott Williamson, exceptional player. And also, you know, he has worked to get his drum sound because he's also, my dad is a drummer, mix engineer, recording engineer, and producer and songwriter. You know, you kind of have to be, I'll say this right now for anybody trying to get into the business, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades in order to pay the bills. You got to be able to do a lot of different things. But because my dad has all those skills, he's applied all his, you know, wonderful knowledge in engineering in getting a really good drum sound. Not just from, obviously the most important thing is being a great player, but then obviously you're going to want to get great sound, right? And drums are, you know, a very specific situation because, you know, the drum room actually means a lot. Your mics mean a lot. Where you're placing your mics means a lot. And that goes for most any element of recording. But especially with drums, it's how you mic and record your drums is very heavily going to affect the sound that comes out of it. So anyway, I'll shut up. Here are the drums isolated. And I believe Lewis played, like I had him play along with the like the final drum pass, which is how you get this wonderful like, I mean, he played along so well with these fills. Woo-hoo-hoo! So good. It's got to be my favorite part. So yeah, so that's the drums by themselves, and I can go, you know, again, once we get into mixing, I can go a little bit more into detail of exactly, you know, what these tracks are doing, how I mix them. But that's essentially what the drums are doing. You know, now you can hear in isolation exactly how they sound. No beat detection, none of that bull crap. I ain't dealing with that. I ain't doing any of that. You kidding me? Get good players and let them play, and leave it at that. That's what I say. Now, obviously, there are situations like if you're going for an incredibly electronic sounding thing, then maybe you want to intentionally perfect things. But I try not to do much beat detection or quantizing, depending on what side of the industry you're coming from. For these elements, of course. You know, the thing being, obviously I'm quantizing the living snot out of the chiptune element because, you know, that's what it calls for. So, you know, it just always depends on the song. But if you ask me, I think rock bands really need to stop perfecting all their crap. It's not rock. You're no longer making rock. All right. Off my high horse. Anyway, so, yeah, so that's the track. I guess if a lot of people like when I kind of layer things where I like start to play it and then add elements as we go. So I'll start with the drums, and then we'll just keep going. So here we go. Pretty cool stuff. It's also pretty simple, you know? Like, essentially what you're looking at is guitar rhythms, guitar leads, bass, drums, synths. That's it. You know, you've got a couple extra little like effects elements here, you know, like that low rumbling thing at the beginning. Right? That's just kind of adding a little bit of rising tension. You've got this kind of airy filtered sound, you know, when the beat drops. Right? It just adds a little bit to that element there. You've got a reverse cymbal, again, helping add a little bit of like rising build tension of sorts. Right? And then again, just some added effects here on that final hit. Here they are isolated. So, but yeah, it's pretty simple. There's not like a whole bunch of fancy crap going on here, nor honestly should there be. All the fancy stuff is just in the playing mainly, you know, because again, we're just going for a good straightforward intro theme song that's got pop punk elements alongside chiptune. So yeah. That's the track. So now I will just kind of quickly go through some of the mixing techniques I used to get it sounding how I ultimately got it to sound. But before, should I answer any questions about the composition now, or should I wait, or should we wait until after I kind of show what I did with the mix? I'm gonna ask the chat. Chat, do you want to get your questions in now, or would you rather wait? You know what? Actually, should I decide? I think I should decide this. Let's. Goodness. I think we should probably wait till after, so that if there's any questions you have based off what I said during the mixing phase, you guys can ask then. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and get this crap out of the way. Not a lot of fancy stuff, so you can see going on with the synths. You know, I've got a tape delay on pretty much all of it, which is essentially just a slap delay. I'm doing a slap delay. So you can hear it here. So let me get rid of that slap delay. Which it's not really even a slap delay. I mean, it kind of is, but it's really, I've designed it to sound like a delay you would have heard in one of those old games, where essentially they would just like repeat they would just use a second channel with the same sound, same exact melody, just offset it just a little bit from the original, so you get this like delay echoed sound. Which especially became very prominent in the 16-bit era, I'd say, especially with the Genesis. But Chiptune also did this quite a bit. So let me show you. Hold on, get rid of the Glock. We're not doing that right now. Here's the lead without that delay. And it sounds a little dead, right? So if we add in this guy. Which, by the way, another classic thing that I've noticed with a lot of old school games is they would just have like the delay pan hard left or hard right. So it's not like fighting with the lead, and it actually sounds like it's like almost like a space in the background. Like it was a very cool and very very smart trick that those composers and programmers used to make a lot of this stuff sound like it actually lived in a space, like there was almost like reverb or something, even when there actually wasn't at all, right? Because it's just all, you know, just a computer generating sounds. Yeah, so, what?
What's burning?
Nothing should be burning. I made coffee. Yeah, like an hour ago. Because I felt like it. I'm currently streaming.
It's Tuesday.
Yeah, I know. I'm doing a little bit of a breakdown of a song. So, yeah. I hope that nothing's burning. Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, as you can see here, this is the delay channel right here. It's literally, here's another key thing, don't have any feedback on it. Feedback is like that never would have happened in the chiptune days. Again, I'm using knowledge from NES, Game Boy, all that stuff, and how they actually used, how they actually applied and programmed music, and the synths and stuff, to this track. So, key thing, do not have any, if you want accurate, like, delay effect of, like, the NES, which is also a really cool, kind of unique sound. So it's not always necessarily just about accuracy, but also that it's its own unique sound. But yeah, no feedback. Don't let it like do more than one delay. It should be one delay after, and that's it. And then again, panned hard right. So again, here's without it. On. You know, same thing going on with the arpeggiations here. Right. But yeah, in terms of like actually mixing it, like I didn't do like, there's no compression, because it's just a pure saw wave anyway. You know, I mean, there could be instances where you use compression, but here I absolutely did not. Pretty much all I did was a little bit of basic EQ, and I'm not using any specific EQ or preamp design like analog EQ, because again, I'm not interested in coloring the sound here at all. I just want a pure classic digital synth sound. All the analog is all the elements underneath. Let's keep the synths like clean digital, you know, which generally goes against how I usually mix. I like to use like analog emulations and kinds of approaches to get a little bit more of that color. But yeah, and in this instance, I'm wanting just pure computer sounding. Right, so basically what I'm doing here is I'm bringing up a little bit of like the mid highs, because that's a great spot that it to peek through. Somewhere around 3K is kind of where some of the guitars live and sound pretty good. So I deliberately cut a little bit of that out so that it's not fighting too much with the guitars. But yeah, you can see around 2K and then around 4,500, 5K, I'm spiking a little bit to really bring up the presence there. So here's without that channel EQ on. Again, it's not doing anything substantial, but it's enough to help it peek through, especially in the mix. And I'm also, obviously, you can see I'm low passing it, which is important for pretty much anything to low pass crap, so you're not like having any build up down there. But if you can hear, especially if you're listening intently, you know, they pretty closely emulate the OG like NES and Game Boy crap, which means there is actually some noise and crap going on in the bottom end that we do not want. So listen again without that EQ. All right, and then here's with the EQ backing, cutting out most of that low end. Right, just getting rid of that. So it's not, you know, again, no unwanted buildup in that bottom end that should be saved for drums and bass and whatnot. Yeah, that, I mean, there's that, and then this nice nifty little plugin called Fresh Air that you can get with Slate Digital. Just adding in a little bit of really both, but more mid-air here, which again, let me turn this off and you can hear it just kind of adds, again, as they call it, because it's basically the best way to put it, it adds air on top. It just kind of helps it really peek through at the very top without being like a harsh sound. Right, so that's with it off. Here's with it on. Right, and it just kind of came alive a little bit without sounding harsh, without being like an ugly ringing top end. Off. On. Right, so that just helps it kind of peek through. Let me show you in the track what this sounds like if we turn off both those things. So basically just EQ. In fact, let's turn off the delay too, so you can just hear it without any of that crap. And on. See, you can just, it's just helping it peek through and also take out any frequencies that are making it fight with other stuff, right? It sounds like it sits a lot better in the mix now. So, so yeah, there's that, you know, the harmony channel EQ. This is it. I'm just bringing out a little bit of low mids where square waves tend to definitely pick up some crap, and then low passing. And I guess I'm taking out a little bit of high end because, you know, if I can recall, it's almost definitely because, you know, I don't need high end in this when I've already got this peeking through. Like, all the high end is here. And in fact, I'm actually cutting some of the very top end here and letting fresh air bring back in some more like nice sounding air, because the very top end of the lead of that kind of shrilly sound was just probably a little much, probably just a little annoying grating. So yeah, I'm taking out a lot of this top end though, and not trying to bring any of it back in with fresh air or anything, because, you know, why does the harmony need to do that? It's not the lead, right? So just leave that space for the lead. You know? So, here's without that EQ on. It's just subtle, but it's help, and you can, again, if you're listening pretty intently, you can tell that there's some low end crap we really don't want in there. So yeah, I mean, that's mainly it. It's the same deal for these, you know, for the pulse arps or the arpeggiated stuff. We're just doing very, very slight EQ just where needed, and a little bit of that chiptune delay, and that's it. You know, basically just trying to get it mainly with volume and panning to sit in the mix right, a little bit of EQ, and that's it. We're not trying to do anything fancy here. There's no need to. So that's the synths. Very, very, very simple stuff. I guess I'm noticing here with the bloop that I brought up this area. Probably because I just literally really wanted to accentuate on that one that I can't even hit it right now, but that really high note, right? Because you can see with the analyzer, it's at about 1300 hertz. So anyway, yeah. So, you know, this stuff in the junk. Okay, let me show what's going on with the guitars. This is where a little bit more actual. Well, I say actual, like this isn't mixing. I mean, honestly, I think this should be clear for many people. Quick side note. You know, mixing literally comes down to just volume and panning. Those are like the two basic things that like any mix will have, right? That's literally part of mixing. Everything on top, EQ and compression, some of the most used and important elements of mixing, absolutely. But at the bare minimum, mixing is literally just getting things sitting in the correct spot via volume and panning. So it's really important that you get things sounding right via volume and panning, really before anything else. So anyway, now side note aside, here is the rhythm guitars. I'm using an SSL channel. This is one of my absolute go-tos. You guys have seen me use this before. Waves SSL E channel. It's very light on the CPU and it sounds great. It's fantastic, and most people and their mother and their dog and their cousin use this, and there's a reason why. I'm a huge fan of it. But yeah, this is what I'm using. I've got the analog thing turned on, so you get a little bit of that extra harmonic distortion from the emulation of the circuitry of the SSL. Yeah, basically I am just cutting any unwanted very low frequencies. You know, usually what you want to do is you just want to cut until you start noticing and then pull it back a little bit. Obviously there's exceptions to this, but generally that's kind of a good like guideline to go by. Because obviously you don't want to take out so much low end that the guitars start sounding incredibly thin. So I'm pulling all the way almost up to 200, but not quite, about around 180 hertz low passing, or high passing rather, I guess. I always get them mixed up. They confuse me. And then I am bringing up, now this is the thing, is Joshua loves his guitars to sound a little bit like darker, a little bit warmer and more mellow. I like biting guitars. So, you know, I like to really bring up the high end if I'm not feeling I'm hearing it. Now, again, sometimes you want to keep the high end out, so you leave that for something else. But in this case, especially with how much this track needed to have that excitement, I'm bringing in a lot of top end, around 5.5K upwards, and then I'm bringing up that 3200 area that you can see I cut a little bit out of in the lead chiptune synth. So I'm letting that spot really spike, really have its spot, I guess, in the guitar realm. I'm doing a horrible job of speaking right now, but I think you get my point. And yeah, that's pretty much it. No compression. You know, any compression that's happening would be on Joshua's side. But I'm really not using the compressor at all here. You know, because the amp is already like brick walling it. So here's without that EQ. In fact, here, I'll solo both of them and just turn off the EQ so you can hear what it sounds like without the EQ. It's like you took the blanket off of it, you know? It's like it just came alive, right? So again, off. Right, SSL, fantastic. I use it all the time. Now, here's the other thing. I have, as you can see, I've put these through. They're grouped, but basically I've sent them to a bus. On the bus, I'm putting a little bit of tape emulation, a little bit of tape saturation on top. So this is just another element that I really like because it helps warm up the guitars a little bit and also bring them alive a little bit with some extra tape saturation on top. So here's without that tape saturation on. So you hear like there's this really cool element of like just some high, like some really musical distortion, saturation going on top, thanks to the tape emulation. So again, it's bringing some extra little excitement to the guitars. Here they are again without. So pretty cool stuff. That is the J37, also from Waves. Pretty nifty tape emulation. It's probably one of the main ones I use. The other one that I use quite a bit of, just for anybody curious, is the Slate Digital virtual tape machines. This one, I love the way that it processes low end. It gets you a really nice, big, fat low end. So I really like to use that, especially for bass and drums. In fact, it looks like I did use it on the drums here. Not sure if I used it on... I did not use it on the bass, though, but I used it on the drums. So we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, I mean, you know, SSL E-channel for the rhythms, same deal here. SSL on the octaves. In fact, I'm not even sure if it's any different. It might be okay, so I guess it's not nearly as much high end on the octaves, so we're not like building up a whole bunch of brightness in the guitars that's just over the top. But you know, again, spiking a little bit of that 3 to 4K range here for the guitar octaves, probably a little bit above where this one is. So again, it kind of lives in its own little spot. It's spiked a little bit at a different spot, so it has its little frequency that it pokes out in a little bit. Again, analog on. But yeah, I mean, not much. Again, tape saturation. So let me show it without any of this crap on all of these. And it just pokes through. So now here, what's most important is how it actually sounds with everything else, and not listening in isolation. So let me go ahead and show you what it sounds like if I were to turn all of this off in the mix, in the full track. Very cool. Looks like I've got a little bit of a different thing going on with these extra passes, just these extra little effects passes. Console EQ is an emulation of the Neve 1073, which is probably one of my favorite EQs. Looks like I'm bringing up a little bit of just like mid-range for these guys, since so much of what these are doing is just like harmonic kind of stuff. Like pinch harmonics on the guitar. So and I love the way that this colors it. So let me go ahead and show you what it sounds like without the console EQ on. It also looks like I've got, yep, I had a feeling. So I'm also slamming these quite a bit with the FG Stress, which is Slate's emulation of the Distressor, which is probably one of the best compressors ever made. It's an incredible compressor. And sounds great when you slam it. So, in this case, I am compressing quite a bit, just because it adds a little bit more excitement, and the transients almost poke out in a way. Like I bring out the ringing a little bit more, but I also, as a result, am bringing out a little bit of the front transients with FG Stress. So here is without either of them on. Right. Here's with them both on. Right. So it just excites it a bit. It really, you know, gives it some excitement. Here's just the console EQ. Off. Yeah, the console EQ is definitely bringing up some stuff. Right, and then with that compressor, very nice. right? Because I don't have a super fast attack, so it's waiting a second after the transient hits to pull it back, but then it's not taking forever to bring it back up. Because, you know, that way I'm still getting like some of the ringing coming back at you. Yeah, cool stuff there. Cool stuff. And the only other thing other than these delays here that you can see that I didn't really even touch, I just kind of left them as is and just pulled back the volume on them. These are delays again that Joshua had, like, that were a part of his sound, and he just bounced separately so I could have control over them. But the only other thing is this like room, that I've got this room verb, which just kind of helps the guitars live in a space. Without it on, it just sounds a little dead and dry. It just helps. It's reverb is great for helping things live in a space. You know, a lot of times you don't want to hear the reverb, you just want to feel it. And that was something that I didn't know for a long time. It took me a lot, quite a while to learn that a lot of times you really don't want to actually notice the verb. You just want to feel it. So in this case, here is these tracks without that verb on. Right, so now let me turn on that room. Right, it just kind of helps it, again, we're not trying to go for super noticeable here, we're just trying to help it feel like it's actually in a space, it's living in a room, in a breathable space, and it actually can help in some ways make the guitar sound more clear. Right, it's super dead there, right? It doesn't sound like it's right, but if I turn it back on, and for the reverb, I'm just using basic Logic Pro Space Designer, which is a very, very nice. I mean, it's existed forever, and it's still great. I still use it quite a bit. But yeah, I guess I've got like I just use a patch called Jazz Guitar. Probably adjusted it a little bit, brought it up a little bit, you know, and called it a day. So that's it, you know, some EQ, some verb, subtle verb, and a little bit of tape saturation. That's your guitars. So yeah, we're not doing a whole bunch of crazy fancy nutso stuff here, I don't think. So let me go ahead and jump to the bass here. This is probably where most of the interesting trickery goes on, at least with this track. Like I said earlier, and like you saw, the DI in the grunge pass, which again is just like the bass amp track with a little bit of extra fuzz on it that I've thrown on. That it's a combo of both of these. But the thing is, you're gonna see here, and it's, you know, I'm not really actually writing the faders like much on the guitars. The only element here that I can see is that I've done a little bit of stuff with the lead, which is understandable. Again, I've also done some writing of the faders with the key stuff, but again, really not a whole lot. Most of the adjusting of most of the writing, the faders, the automation for, you know, I guess the youngsters is actually in the bass, believe it or not. And it's not because he played all over the place and his dynamics were weird, but actually, because he absolutely wasn't. He's again, like I've said, he's a phenomenal player. But it's actually because of and I kind of brought this up earlier, but it's mainly because of these slap bass parts. I really, really love the fuzz, right? But in these percussive slap bass elements, it's like so important that we get like the brighter and more clear signal from the DI. DI just meaning direct input for anybody that doesn't know. So just the clean, like direct signal from the bass, as opposed to going through an amp with any effects on it. It's important to get that percussive slap bass element. So in those areas where the slap really hits, I bring down the fuzz and bring up the slap. So again, here's the DI so you can hear it. Right, here's the grunge on top. Here's the grunge by itself. Right, but in these spots where you're going to see with the slap bass, you can see that this is, I'm bringing up the DI here where the slap hits and bringing it down in the fuzz, in the distorted track. So we're really focusing on the clean percussive element of it. Right, and then again down here. So you can hear, if I just solo the grunge, you'll hear it go down in volume at these slap bass spots. Right? And again over here. Right? Just really want to let the main DI, the clean signal, have that moment. In terms of how I'm mixing them together, you can probably see here, but I've got the grunge pulled back they're not at equal volume, regardless. You know, and this is all based on your ears and what you want to hear, but, you know, for me, obviously, I want to hear more the DI, the direct input, which has got most of the really good low end. Again, using console EQ. I love console EQ on bass. I love the way that it colors the sound. I am bringing up like 60 hertz quite a bit here, 4.5 decibels. Another classic thing that I learned this from my dad, is to spike 600 to 700 hertz in the bass. And just to honestly repeat him, because same goes for me. He told me one time, he was like, you should try spiking 600, 700. He said, I don't know why. It just, that's a nice spot with the bass. It just kind of brings up some cool clarity for the bass. And I'm in the same boat. I don't know why. I can't tell you why. Someone who's maybe a little bit more mathematical or scientific can tell you exactly why, but I don't know. All I can tell you is something about 600 to 700 hertz on bass. If you turn that up just a little bit, sometimes that can be a really nifty little trick to bring a little bit more clarity into the bass. So I'm bringing that up a little bit. No bass. No, we're not low passing anything here. The bass is pretty much holding all of the low end. I do have a compressor on this. One of the first things so far that we're actually seeing with some legitimate compression. Using the vintage Opto, which is a Logic's imitation of the LA2A classic compressor. I like to, you know, this is just good because, you know, compression on bass is usually a good thing to have. Just because of, you know, sometimes you can get some unwanted resonance ringing in the bass. You know, even the best players, sometimes there's just still like some minimal elements that you know is great to be able to have a compressor just kind of pull it back a little bit, and then bring it back. You know, another great thing is what was I gonna say? Well, it's great to have because it also kind of will help things, all the notes being, you know, played just be a little bit more consistent. But even above all of that, you know, for me personally, a lot of times the LA2A especially, but various different compressors can just help the bass sound fatter. Right, and I'm not like compressing super hard here. Sometimes I compress fairly hard on the bass, but I'm not here. right? Like we're really barely ever getting past 5 dB down, which is, you know, I mean, that's like, you know, I suppose that's not like light compression, but that's not like super harsh compression either, I don't think. I also have the distortion set to soft. I like that. Let me show you what it's like when I don't have that on. I do like that, like this extra little distortion thing that they've given me the option for with Logic's compressor. Shout outs to Logic's stock compressor. It's actually fantastic. It also makes it louder, which, you know, if you've heard anybody else say things that are just louder, a lot of times that fools people into thinking it's better. It's not. It's not true. So don't let your ears fool you. But this has got a little bit of a fatter tone to it, and I like that there's some extra harmonic distortion going on that I really like. So I turned it to soft. I don't always do that, but in this case, I guess I like the sound of it. You know, usually with bass, I have a slower attack, but also slower release time. You know, I mean, I suppose that's not a crazy slow release time, but, you know, it's slow enough that it's like, it's not letting like any, again, unwanted ringing out, or, you know, any just little elements that just almost always happen with bass guitar. It's not letting them like really like be at the same volume or louder than the actual note, right? Or something like that. Garrett doesn't really know what he's talking about. I guess this little spot here around 270 280 hertz was just maybe a little much for me, so I pulled back a dB and a half of it. So here's without that on. You know, and usually most of the time with this kind of stuff, what's happening is I'm hearing some sort of buildup that I'm not liking, and so I'll literally just go in and I'll just go around the area that I think I'm hearing it and just kind of spike it to make sure that's what I'm hearing, you know. So in this case, I was like, ew, I don't want to hear that, right? So I found the spot that I didn't like, and I just pulled it back a little bit, right? I'm not even pulling it back that far. But I guess I'm also actually bringing up with this channel EQ a little bit of that top end, probably mainly for the slap bass element, just so that peeks through a little bit better. But yeah, that's it for the DI. The only other thing, actually, this is a big thing with the bass. So I kid. I take back that was it. Big thing, chorus. This is a pretty classic thing that I do. And I'm actually a little shocked because this is not what I usually do. Right here is I brought up chorus, right, on a bus. So I sent it to an auxiliary, and then I had chorus there. And this is something I do a lot because it helps like kind of bring the bass alive and have a little bit of movement, and also have a little bit of like something that's not like just directly a dead center, dead sound, without having it so out here, right? Because you want your bass to really be in the center almost like 95% of the time. But chorus can help with bass to kind of give it a little bit of movement and a little bit of space, a little bit of some sort of width without, you know, being this crazy, like, over the top crap. So here's without it on. Right, it gives a little bit of character, right? Because you get a little bit of like out of tune sound from the chorus. Now, what I usually do though, that I'm actually shocked I didn't do here, is I usually will get rid of the absolute low end, the lowest end, like anywhere under like 150 hertz, in the core. I would usually do something like this, to get rid of like all the really low frequencies. That are, you know, getting spread out here. So again, we're really focusing on the low end, the lowest of the low end being dead center. but the chorus still gives you this effect of, you know, gives you this stereo effect without being overbearing. I'm shocked that I didn't do that here. But I guess it ended up sounding okay anyway. I'm also, yeah, okay, so that's DI. That's the DI. Here's the amp, which you can hear is mainly in the center. When I stop it, you can hear a little bit of that reverb trail. I am throwing, I think, the same exact, the same room reverb as I threw in the guitars onto the grunge pass here. So again, it feels like it's like actually living in a space a little bit. But again, it's not like a ton, so you can't really, again, you're not really noticing it. You're more feeling it, which is an important thing here. So I'm gonna show you, I'm pretty sure this guy is actually doing quite a bit to the sound. So here's without any of those elements on. Yeah, so that's what he actually sent me before I messed with it. So then I went in and added this grinder pedal emulation for, again, Logic Pro. Shout out to their stock stuff because it's really quite incredible. That's doing a whole bunch. So yeah, grinder's doing quite a bit there. And then console EQ. I'm cutting the low end to keep it from fighting with the DI, which is holding all the low ends. So you can hear if I have this off. Turn it on. Right, so I'm having it peak, you know, take that like where the heavy fuzz is. I'm spiking that like mid-range, so it really peaks through at the top there. But I'm taking out the low end so it's not fighting with the DI, right? So again, with it off. Right, so it might sound thinner there, but once we combine it, it ends up sounding a lot better, which I'll show you in a second here. Again, compressor, LA2A, same deal basically. I may have adjusted the parameters a little bit. It actually looks like I really didn't. And then a little bit extra channel EQ. It looks like it's actually the same deal here, same EQ going on. So so let me go and show you what happens if we don't have this stuff on here. We'll keep the pedal board on since that's actually pretty integral to the sound. But this is without the console EQ on for the grunge pass. It's on. Right, so you're not getting any unwanted buildup, and you're actually helping put all the low end focus where it should be. But I'm also brightening, obviously, the grunge pass, so it actually pokes through better. So again, with it off and on. Right? Okay, so that's the bass. You know, that's essentially it. It looks like I may have. I guess when I bust it, when I combined these and busted, I also brought out just a little bit of 130 hertz. I guess that was just another thing that happened when I was mixing. I was just like, I don't like that. I don't like that frequency too much, so I'm gonna get rid of it. So that's that. Final thing, and then we'll do questions. Drums. To refresh your brain, this is what they sound like. And drums are pretty like, there's a lot of like it doesn't seem like there's a lot, because I mean, to some extent there isn't. Like I'm keeping it simple. But if I turn all this off, I think you're gonna notice pretty quickly the difference that this stuff makes. Again, miking your room, all of that, your ability to get a really good recording at the start is incredibly integral to, you know, how it's gonna sound later. It's really hard to polish a turd, right? So Dad did a fantastic job of recording this, not just playing it, but recording it. But regardless, with all of this crap off and the bus stuff off, this is what the drums sound like with just the raw tracks. I guess we'll turn those off as well. Right, so quite a bit different. I'm just going to actually go step by step here to show you what I'm doing. And if any of you have seen my other breakdowns, you've probably already seen this before. It's not a lot different here. SSLE channel, my favorite thing. I mean, maybe not my favorite thing, but it's definitely one of my go-tos, regardless. And in a lot of drum situations, that this is what I'm doing. So we'll start by focusing on the kick here. So with the kick, because I'm letting so much of the lowest of the low end have its spot with the bass, I'm gonna cut some of that with the kick. Right, so we're gonna cut anywhere below 50. And then what I'm gonna do is, I'm not really brightening it at all. However, there is a little spot, and it's different with every kick, but usually it's somewhere between, I'd say, 1 and 3.5K. That there's a spot in that higher mid-range that really helps add some clarity and some punch to the kick, which is very, very, I would say this is a very important spot, because again, sure, you've got it's your bass drum and you want that low end, but a lot of times it's good to just let the bass hold that low end, and the way you get your kick to really peek through is with stuff like this, by really spiking that that high mid-range. And then, you know, I guess I'm bringing up a little bit of 95 hertz on the kick here, which is, you know, like high, low. I don't know the best way to put it. It's not like low, but it's you know, it's still low enough to not be low mid, I'd say. And again, that's just a spot that I think the kick sat well in. That was above the bass. You know, sometimes bass and kick end up sounding great together without having to do like a ton of EQ. It just depends on the track and what's going on. But in this case, let me go ahead and show you. Here's the kick without any of it on. Also, noise gate, big thing. You're gonna hear that obviously you're gonna get mic bleed from all the other drums with the mic. So it's really important to have a noise gate in most situations. So you're cutting out all that, or most of the noise bleed. From that microphone, from that track, right? That's it on. So let me just go ahead and show you now. Again, nothing else is on with the drums, but here is, and the kick just boom, like that. Just came forward. Now it's way more aggressive. Again, off, on. Right? Very nice. Snare top and snare bottom. Snare top is where most of your low end and beef from the snare is going to be. You know, some people will only send a mic for the top. But a lot of people have a bottom and a top snare mic, which is very nice, because the bottom is where you get most of the snare rattle. That's where you get most of the snare sound. But in this case, with the snare top, bringing up some top end here, taking out, again, any low frequencies that are unwanted. Right. I guess I'm taking out a little bit of 500 hertz, actually 4 dB of it. I guess it's just there was probably a ring there that I wasn't a fan of. But then there's a spot. There's usually a spot with almost every snare. In fact, I'd say every snare in a little bit more of the low mid area. I'd say anywhere between 180 to 250 hertz, maybe even 300 sometimes, depending on how high pitched your snare is. Where there's it's low end spot where you can add some beef and really make it sound punchy without it sounding like, you know, necessarily crazy low, unless you want that. You know, there are some fantastic tracks with just really beefy low end snares. Shout outs to Vultures by John Mayer. That is one exceptional drum sound and one exceptional mix with a really awesome, crazy beefy low end snare. Anyway, I digress. So I guess the other thing, I totally forgot to mention, I am compressing the kick. It's not a ton. I don't think. Yeah, we're bringing back 1 dB of threshold. The compressor is at 4.1, so actually let me go back to that real quick. Let me show you what happens if we turn this off. By the way, important thing, there are exceptions. There's always exceptions, but generally I would say hit the channel out if you're using SSL, because you're feeding the EQ into the compressor as opposed to the EQ coming after the compressor. I tend to think that most compressors it usually sounds better if you put the EQ before the compressor, but there's always exceptions. So here is we will here's bypassing the dynamics, which means we'll also bypass the noise channel. So ignore the fact that you're probably going to hear more noise bleed again. And back on. Right, and again, the compressor here, I'm not really hitting. You can see this right here is the this is telling you how much gain reduction is going on with the compressor. At a couple spots you can see it start to tickle -6 dB. Again, I guess, you know, that's not light compression, but that's not super harsh compression either. And you know, again, basically what that's doing is it's just grabbing we're grabbing that front transient and then letting it pull back the volume quickly right after. So you really get the front end like punch, that front hit, but then we're not getting much ringing following that, which can help clean up the sound and also make it sound more aggressive. So sorry, that rabbit trail aside, or I guess that I forgot to mention that incredibly important thing. Same thing goes with the snare mic. We're doing some compression here. 2.1 ratio, 2-to-1 ratio. It's not, we're not, again, it's not like crazy hard necessarily. The threshold is further back. But because I actually want to keep in the ring, the release is super fast. So yeah, it is pulling back the volume after that transient. Again, I don't want to hit this fast attack thing because then we lose all of the front transient of the snare and then there's nothing hitting. But very fast release in this case, because I want to hear the ring of the snare kind of come back. Right, so let me go and show you without it. What's interesting is actually I did not feed the EQ into the compressor here. So again, like I said, it's kind of exceptions to every rule. You know, I would generally hit channel out here. I would generally feed the EQ into the compressor as opposed to EQ on top of the compressor, but obviously there's always exceptions. So that's without anything. That's on. Right, and it just it excites it quite a bit. It brings a lot of top end to it. But again, yeah, the compressor is just kind of helping give it a little bit more punch there. If I were to turn on that fast attack, let me just show you right now what happens if we turn on that fast attack. It's just going to squash it. So here it is without fast attack on. And now we've just lost all the life out of it, right? It's just, let's turn it back off. Right, so now we're holding those dynamics in there, which I'd say is really important for drums. So yeah, that's snare top, snare bottom. Like I said, it's the rattle, the rattling. It's catching the actual snares part of it. So I take out a lot of low end here, but bring up some high end so we're getting that rattle. I guess I'm doing a little bit of compression here, but I mean, you can see it's very light on the compression. Here's without that snare bottom mic, so you can compare. Right, so it just, now you're really hearing the snare in the snare. My stream has disconnected. Testing. I guess my stream disconnected for a second. Are you guys still with me? Hello. Are you guys still with me? Sorry about that. I don't know why the stream disconnected. It let me know. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. I don't know why that happened. Okay, glad you guys are still with me. Okay, yeah, so that's snare top and snare bottom. Hopefully you didn't miss anything there. I guess just to repeat myself, if we lost anything, was I cut out a lot of the low end of the snare rattle, because that's mainly what the bottom mic is for, is just to focus on the snare element, and then we can get all that hard, beefy sound from the top mic. So again, here's the top mic. Here's the bottom mic. And here's both of them together. Very nice. Okay. Before we get to toms, because those are just so they only show up in a few spots. Overheads. Overhead mics are obviously incredibly important to the drum sound. This is basically how you're getting, you know, your cymbals and really most of the hats. You know, like I have a hat mic here, but as you can see, I muted it and got rid of it. I didn't want the hat mic. Sometimes I do use the hat mic, but in this instance, I did not. So. So there's your overheads here. Let me go ahead and turn off the crap that's going on them so you can hear the raw track. So I'm bringing this to life quite a bit. I tend to compress the overheads quite a bit more because I like that sound. It brings a lot more of an interesting movement and excitement to the drums, for lack of a better word. I'm sure there's science to it. I can't tell you. Maybe in a few years. But yeah, I cut out some of the low end again to just let that low end be for the kick and the snare. So I'm cutting out quite a bit of low end, but I'm brightening it, right? Because this is like the cymbal mics as well, right? So we really want to make sure that those bright cymbals really peek through. And then I guess I'm cutting out a little bit of what looks like about, yeah, 700 hertz. That's kind of a classic spot that can sometimes be unwanted in drums, whereas they can be wanted in a bass. I tend to find that oftentimes they're not so great in drums. But again, always depends. And then yeah, like I said, I'm hitting the compressor quite a bit harder here, so you can see we're getting like to 10 dB out, like 10 dB down on the compression, which is pretty hard. That's definitely harder compression. I usually do faster release, so everything just kind of thwacks you right back a second after it pulls back, so you get this really cool sound of that. Fast attack on this. Actually, no, I don't think it. Oh yeah, fast attack is on. My bad. I totally got thrown off there. Yeah, fast attack on. The reason I do that with the overheads quite a bit is because most of the harsh transients are being grabbed by the snare and the kick, right? So why do we need to add on top of that with the overheads? I don't think we do. Why not let the overheads really grab all the ringing and the extra things coming right afterward? You know, I'm sure there have been points in which I have kept the attack slower, but in this case, faster attack, so it's pretty much grabbing that transient and immediately pulling it down. Again, if you hear without it, actually the dynamics are a little bit more like that. There's less compression, right? And that slams it way more, right? Because we're immediately pulling back the transient, so it gives the compressor way more time to just pull stuff back. And then you end up with harsher compression. So that's generally the deal here. Even then, my ratio is not very high. But yeah, definitely hitting it harder there. I've also got an extra channel EQ on here, which looks like I'm cutting out also around 550 hertz. I guess that was another spot I didn't like here. So again, here's without either of them on. And with them on. You know, so adding quite a bit of excitement. And then the room mics, you know, these are I love the room mic. It's not fit for every scenario, you know, especially if you want a tighter drum sound, but especially when you're trying to get a bigger drum sound or like a rock drum sound, love the room sound. right? And my dad uses, I can't tell you exactly what ribbon mics are being used, but I know they're ribbon mics. Ribbon mics are great for room mics. So yeah, in this case, again, cutting out some of the low end, though not as much as the overheads, because I guess I just liked a little bit more of the beefiness of it. I'm bringing in a little bit of high end, around, well, really more mid-high, close to 4K. And then I'm taking out some of 600 hertz, but a very, very small, like, very hard cue point. So it's very, very, very specifically around 600 and not too many other frequencies around it. Looks like I brought up, and again, so I don't recall doing a lot of this, but it looks like I brought up quite a bit of 47, 470 hertz, which is a low mid area. Again, probably bringing in some of that like beefiness in the bottom end, and I just like the sound of that. I like to, already the room mics are kind of slammed a little bit. You can hear there's definitely some compression, like just kind of committed into the sound. But screw it, let's go further. So I did. I usually do with room mics. I really like to, a lot of times with these kind of things, I do like to really hit the overheads in the room mics with more compression. But yeah, so in this case, not quite as harsh of compression as the overheads, you know, probably mainly because the room mics already are being compressed, you know, before I'm even doing anything to them. But you can see that they're still going easily to like -6 dB. So here's without the SSL on. As you can see, SSL is pretty much covering most of the drum sound here, most of the drum mixing on. And same deal with the overheads, fast attack, so it's pulling that transient back real quick. Pretty fast release, so I'm still getting a lot of the ringing coming back and you know, all those elements. Another reason that I like to have fast releases so that, you know, oftentimes when it's a slower release, the cymbals do this weird thing where it's just like, and then they like get way louder way after the fact, and it's just kind of, it sounds weird to me most of the time. But yeah, that's that, and then the toms, which in this case I decided to use console EQ. Obviously you can see I really like console EQ as well. Bringing up a little bit of the low mid area, that's usually where toms live, but we don't want them to jumble up and build up and muddy up the low end, so we're cutting anything under 80, at least for tom 1. That's the higher tom. I'm sure that the lower tom, yep, cutting at a lower point, because if we cut at 80, that's just, we're cutting out too much of the information that we actually want to hear in the toms. So let me go ahead and show you what these sound like without anything on. Hold on, I've got the room mic still on. Let me get to it better. Right, so there you go. You know, I tend to bring up quite a bit of high end in these, so you can really hear like the stick hitting the drum. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty basic EQ. Like, we're bringing up a little bit of like the low mids and then cutting any unwanted stuff in the bottom end, pretty typical. And then I just like to brighten the very top end. But I liked the way, now actually that was without them on, so here's with them on. But I like the way that console EQ sounded on these, I guess. I don't always do console EQ for toms. Again, console EQ being an emulation of the, or really more an imitation is probably a better word, of the Neve 1073. So, off, on. You know, I just like the way it colors it, and it's just adding a little bit of extra top end and bottom end, really. That's it. You know, in a lot of instances, I'll pull back like 700 hertz of the toms. In this case, I did not. But I do, like I said, 700 can sometimes be an offender for drum sounds. But again, it's different every time, and I guess this time around I did not take out the 700. So also using again vintage opto, which again is the LA2A imitation of Logic Pros. I like the way LA2A works on toms. I usually do this vintage opto on toms. This is pretty typical for me to do. It's a little bit of a softer compressor. And see, we're pulling back maybe tops -3 dB. Right, which just lets the front end of it like hit again, classic compressor thing, especially with the drums, but not letting like the low end ringing go for too long or you know, be too loud as to get in the way of everything else going on. So yeah, again, with both of these things off, both the EQ and compressor off of the toms, and with EQ and compressor on. All right, it's not doing like a whole bunch, because again, all this stuff was already played and recorded so well. So I'm not like doing any like really hardcore stuff on this. I guess the last thing before I show what I'm doing on the bus is the reverbs. I've got a reverb on my snare here, which I've just affectionately called the snare verb. Using Verb Suite, this is also from Slate. I'm just using a patch called Realistic Full Drum Room 2. I probably adjusted the parameters a bit, I usually do. But here's without that verb on. And with it on. Actually, that's a pretty generous amount of reverb going on there. I think that same... No, it's actually different. Different reverb being used for the overheads and the room. So, also from Verb Suite, though. Actually, it's like... This is literally the same thing. Okay. Wait. So, it looks like I literally... This is funny. Did I literally create 2 buses of the exact... This is how pro I am. I think this is literally like the same freaking... Yeah, it is. That's so funny. I think I've just... Okay, so the only difference in drum room is I brought out a little bit of low end. Anyway, so yeah, that's my reverb that I'm using for the overheads in the rooms as well. So here's without them on. And with them on. Off. On. Yeah, so there you go. Okay, so let me once again, just for kicks and giggles, let me go ahead and show you what this all sounds like without the reverbs or the EQ or the compressors on. This is just the raw tracks here. And with everything on. And now it's super punchy. Very nice. Okay, so the final thing that I did in this case is I did some bus compression and some tape emulation. So I've got the SSL G compressor. Love this guy. It just added some nice little punch to the whole entire drum bus. So again, this is on like all the drums, the full bus. Slow attack, fast release, pretty typical of me to do that. Turned on analog. Ratio really low, because I don't want this to, you know... We're pretty much just tickling the meter. Pretty much the only point which it really gets hard is like... You know, it might get to like -2 dB, but that's basically it. You know, threshold and ratio are not being hit very hard, so we're not really hitting the compressor hard here, but it adds a little bit of extra punch on top. This is without it on. And G compressor on. Right, now the kick really, now you're really hearing that kick. I love the way the G compressor sounds on a drum bus. Again, off. Right, and then virtual tape machine. I brought this up earlier. I use a couple different tape emulations pretty typically. This is one of them, Slate's virtual tape machine. I like the way that it processes low end. It really brings a lot of beefy low end to a lot of stuff that I really like. So I basically did that here. I pretty much will just flip through these until I like the way it sounds. There's not exactly rhyme or reason to any of it. It's basically what does my ear want to hear in this scenario, and I just go with that. So here's without that tape emulation on. And here's with it on. Yeah, I just love the way that sounds. Again, off. On. And there's your drums, you know, great player, great recording, and then I just do a little bit of mixing on top, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, and in case you're interested what this would have sounded like with none of this on, and the truth is, I pretty much will do basic like mixing adjusting of all of this the moment I get the files. I'm pretty much already mixing to some extent the moment I'm recording or getting any of the files. You know, I'm not... you know, there's not like technically a mixing stage. There's just basically I already kind of start mixing as I'm going, and then once I'm finished with everything, then I focus on all the meticulous like really mixing, you know, and then that would be the mixing stage, quote unquote. So I never really would have actually heard it completely raw here. I would have pretty much already had it in a spot that I wanted it. You know, within the first 30 minutes of me having the drums in the track. But this is what it would sound like if we turned all of this off with the mix. Uno momento. Okay, so here's without any of it on. Night and day, honestly. Yeah, so that's pretty much the track. I've gotten through everything, I believe, he said. Now would be the time, if you've got any questions, now would be the time to bring them up. I've probably got, I'm actually shocked. This is like, I always think like, oh yeah, I'll get through this in like an hour and a half, and it's been like 2 hours now. So if you've got any questions, I'm now looking at the chat. So, ask away. Thank you for the compliments, by the way. I'm seeing some of them right now. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. How long have I been making music? I have been writing music since the age of 4. I've been producing and recording music, so over 20 years now, 21 years. In terms of actually like producing and recording it, I started to get my feet wet, working in the studio with my dad on some stuff when I was probably about 10 years old. And I really started doing it on my own probably about a year later, so like 2008, which would be like 14 years ago now. But I started writing music when I was 4 years old. When would you use a digital exciter, such as Logic's exciter, rather than using tape? Wow, if only I could say that. Tape saturation to excite a specific instrument or sound. Again, there's no really rhyme or reason. It just depends on what my ear wants to hear. I definitely use Logic's exciter. I for sure use it. Yeah, it depends on what I'm looking for. You know, because tape saturation kind of excites things a totally different way, right? Tape saturation, and it's not tape saturation also isn't necessarily an exciter, right? It can serve different purposes. But you know, as you could see in like the guitar rhythms here, it was definitely serving the purpose of having like this kind of sheen on top, this little high-end saturation that was happening at the very tippy top, which just kind of brought them out a little more. It made them sound a little more exciting. But yeah, in a lot of scenarios, you know, like if I wasn't trying to be so pure digital sounding with the 8-bit lead, I may have thrown an exciter on it. In fact, you know, had it been a different day, had I been feeling a little different, I may have tried it. And in fact, I may have, and I've just forgotten. But I do like to use exciters quite a bit on leads to sometimes bring out a certain frequency that helps it poke through. But again, it's different every time. But I do use the Logic exciter quite a bit, but it's very different from tape saturation. So they kind of, they're used in different ways for different things. So it's kind of hard to say exactly what I would use one over the other for. But I guess usually tape saturation is best for, it's got like that harmonic distortion that gives it like, there's just kind of, mostly it's like a sheen, like it's like a soft top end almost is the best way I can put it, which is very nice. And the other thing about tape saturation is usually it's, as a result, it's compressing the sound. So whereas with an exciter, you're basically just grabbing a certain frequency and you're exciting it. In this case, you know, tape saturation will also do a lot to the dynamics. So it's all about what you're specifically looking to do to the sound. Does it slightly annoy you to be called the Scott the Woz music guy? Compared to what I used to be called, no, absolutely not. I'm way cooler with that term. Way cooler with that name. Missed the first half. Did you record synth instruments or did you bounce MIDI files? If so, TWY, did you bounce them? I'm not sure what TWY means unless that was a typo, and I'm not, my brain is not able to figure out exactly what that was supposed to mean if it was a typo. I recorded the synths with a magical 8-bit plugin. You can see it here. Yeah, here's my demo drums. These are all my hidden tracks, things that are going unused. This is magical 8-bit. If only I could open it up. This is magical 8-bit plug. It's free. It's used a lot because it's a very close, accurate emulation of. I mean, it's just basic like saw and square waves, but there's a certain way that obviously the NES process these sounds that you, especially if you want a very accurate chiptune sound, you'd want something that's going to get you a close emulation of what the processing and circuitry actually sounded like. So that's what this is doing. It's just it's a simple plugin that basically just emulates NES. Why did I bounce them? Because there's a few reasons why. Number one, CPU, MIDI. In this case, Magical 8-bit doesn't take a lot of CPU. But MIDI can take up quite a bit of CPU, so it's good to just bounce down once you've like solidified this is the recording. The other thing is MIDI. You know, it's a lot of times it's just switching up. It'll switch up or it'll process things different every time that you play it, which is fine. But that essentially means you're getting a real time, like it's playing it real time every single time you play it back, even when you're mixing. So a lot of times, just out of principle, I'll bounce things down once I'm done recording it. Once I've like solidified all the recording, I'll obviously still hold on to the original MIDI, as you can see here. But I'll bounce it down so then what I'm mixing is the audio file, the recorded file, right? So in this instance, I don't think it was super important that I did that. But in a lot of instances, like with say keyscape or something that's a lot more meticulous, like it's actually round robining and whatnot, I'll bounce down, number one, because of CPU, and number two, because I want an actual quote unquote recorded take that I can mix, that isn't actually, you know, changing, right? Like we've recorded it now, so it's not So it's basically, in this sense, it was almost definitely just out of principle. The other thing, I guess the one other reason, is sometimes MIDI will just bug out. It'll just freak out, and I'll have really annoying like things that happen, and then I have to like shut off the MIDI for a second, like reset all the parameters. And so it's a lot easier just to bounce it down so it's an audio file, and you're not dealing with any of that weird MIDI crap that just happens. It just does a lot. That would be another reason why. Like, I guess, for instance, sometimes if I stop a track in the middle of it pitch bending and then I try to go back, it will still read it as being pitch bent there. So then I'll end up playing it back and it'll be 100% out of tune. Yeah, those are kind of the reasons why I would do that. My best guess is, in this case, it was probably the last reason that I said. It was probably that the MIDI was bugging out, and also just out of principle that I bounced down. So, yeah. Produce music on GarageBand Mobile since I don't have the money for other DAWs nor a Mac. Any tips on mixing with GarageBand's mobile limited EQ? Well, I'll say this: if you can get stuff sounding pretty good using such a limited DAW like that, you will be way better off once you actually like get something like Logic Pro. Which Logic Pro, if you ask me, if you're getting really into like GarageBand on your iPad or whatever it is, like, I'll tell you right now, GarageBand is no pun intended, the logical step up. As you probably can see, Logic is pretty much built by a lot of the same people that make GarageBand, and they're both under Apple. So Logic Pro is essentially GarageBand with a ton more bells and whistles. I don't know if I have any great tips for you, because that's such a giant can of worms, that question. But I will say, if you can master using the EQ and figuring out how to get stuff to sound good on your iPad, then you're already probably miles ahead of a whole bunch of other people. I think it's very important, though. There's a lot of people that are like, ooh, I want to get into music development. I don't think I've ever heard that term. I just use that. That's the first time I've ever heard that. I want to get into music production. And then they just go off and buy like a Logic Pro, or like some maybe more expensive DAW and a fancy computer and all this crap. I'm like, dog, your stuff is going to sound like garbage regardless. What you've got to figure out first is you've got to improve your skills before you can use any of the fancy stuff. You have to inherently be good, like learn and get better yourself, because the tools aren't going to do it for you. So yeah, I would say, honestly, if you're really trying to commit to making music on that iPad, good on you. Really focus on making that happen, and then we can once you've like really pushed that to its limits, then you can focus on getting new tools and stuff, and you'll be a better producer for it, I think. Probably a dumb question. Where would a drum room mic be placed in a drum room? It is different all the time. Generally, it's pretty good to have it up against like the back wall. Is a good spot to put it. Now, in this case, it would be two mics, right? Because it's a stereo. We're getting a stereo image here. You can do a mono drum signal. A lot of people would. A lot of people have. In this instance, as you could hear, and in most instances when I'm mixing, I'm working with two channels, so two room mics mixed down to stereo. In with my dad, what he's got two ribbon mics lower to the ground. Where you place it in terms of height is important too. Where you place it in any axis, I don't freaking know, whatever you call it, is going to be it's going to totally change the sound. So you just kind of have to move it around and get it where you want it, what sounds good to you. Obviously, you have to be, if you're going to do stereo miking, you have to be careful about phase and whatnot. But yeah, you would have in my dad's case, he's got like, his drum room is not like a square. In fact, it shouldn't be. Most drum rooms should not be a perfect square. Most rooms that you record in should not be a perfect square. And if they are, they better be treated real well, because that's going to be harder to deal with in terms of the acoustics. But his is actually more of like a long rectangle. And we could say like the drums are over here, and then the room mics are closer to the ground. Again, 2 ribbon mics, pretty much on both sides of, like, close to the corners of the wall, on the opposite end. And basically that just picks up like all the reflections coming in, so you get all the room sound. And I love the way that like ribbon mics process and take in drum room sounds. So yeah, that's kind of the simple answer. Again, it's kind of trial and error. You kind of got to figure it out. I'm not even gonna say I'm good at it, because again, I didn't even set them up. My dad did all of it. He has gotten his room down to a science, you know. But that's what he did, and that's what I've seen many times. So yeah. I understand overheads are placed above, and the actual drum mics are placed directly, not really on the drums. Yeah, they're placed obviously closer to the drums, based on whichever. Yeah, but yeah. I'm in a class that learns about DAWs, and we're focusing on Pro Tools. As someone who works with Logic, do you ever have projects where you kind of swap DAWs with other people? Rarely. I have needed to use Pro Tools on a few sessions, but it's rare. I'm almost entirely working out of Logic Pro. I guess if you're asking if I'm sharing projects with other people that are in different DAWs, yes, that happens quite a bit. I know a lot of people that use Ableton. That's kind of the hot one for EDM and electronic producers right now. They love Ableton. So I work with a lot of people that work in Ableton. I work with a lot of people that record in Pro Tools. It's pretty much just those two. I rarely actually work with anybody that's working with anything that's not Ableton or Pro Tools or Logic. Those are kind of the big three. So yeah, and in that case, I'm basically just, you know, we just bounce files, share them, you know, and just, you know, send files back and forth. It's pretty simple. So, hopefully that was your question and I answered it. But yeah. What about FL? Yeah, I guess I've worked with a few people that work in FL Studio. That one's a little bit more rare for me. I don't work with as many people in FL Studio. But I have worked with a few. But yeah, it's mainly Ableton, Logic, and Pro Tools that people are using. And there's nothing wrong with the other DAWs. Like, if they work for you, they work for you. But like, I'm just saying, like, most of the time when I'm recording, or when I'm sending files or receiving files, it's from people that are either in Logic, Pro Tools, or Ableton. So yeah. Any other questions before I close out? Any other questions? Mainly questions about this project. But if you have any music questions in general, I'm happy to answer them. But, you know, mainly, you know, the G4TV theme. Are there any other questions about this project, about, you know, any the process, the writing, the mixing, any of that? Or are we... How do you overcome writer's block when making demos or even completing final products or projects? Well, I've said this in the past. The reality in this job is clients and work and deadlines do not care about your writer's block. They don't care that you're having a hard time. There's a deadline, you got to meet it, right? So a big thing for me is because I do run into writer's block. I definitely do. A big thing is really there's various different ways to go about it. But when I have writer's block, really one of the most important things for me is legitimately that I have to just force my way through it. That sounds so awful, but it really is. The deal is, a lot of times if I feel stuck, the best thing for me to do is to literally just start hitting notes on the piano until some combination of random notes, even if it's just 2 or 3 notes, somehow sparks something. And most of the time that spark will help me to then, oh, that's cool. Oh, so then what if I do this? Oh, okay, well then what if I do this? And then it becomes a domino effect. I won't say that is, sometimes it still doesn't work out that easily, but that's most of the time what I have to do. Is just kind of push my way through, and just me, because like I said, deadlines don't care, so you can't just wait for some divine inspiration to hit you. It's not going to happen in these scenarios. So for me, a lot of times it truly is just, you got to force your way through, and a lot of times eventually you'll end up finding something that works out. Having outside opinions is very helpful, because it'll help you to know if you're on the right track or not. I've definitely known situations where I've had a really hard time writing something. I send it to someone, and then sometimes it's either, listen, man, this is actually a lot better than you think it is. You're overthinking it. That's a typical thing. Or it's, yeah, this isn't really working. I think you're, this is where it's not working, and then based on that, lots of times I'll be like, okay, get back in the zone, or go back to the drawing board. And then, in many cases, because I've heard like, okay, this is the feedback, this is the issue, then I'm able to just kind of go like, boom, okay, now I know what I need to do. Now I've got the idea. So I guess that's some things I could say. Would you ever make a full version of the theme? Probably not, because that would require pretty much getting all the players to get their exact same tones. And while I suppose that's to some extent kind of possible, we could get something close and get it to match, and people probably wouldn't notice. That also would mean hiring all these players again, and basically recording all this stuff again. And the thing is, like, Scott would basically need to, he would have to want to do an extended version, which he may eventually. I don't know. That's up to him though. Because there's money involved. So yeah, the chances of there being an extended version are incredibly low. I would say you have a 1% chance at the moment. So almost definitely not, but I suppose it's not completely out of the question, but I really don't even want to give you hope there. Do you have any advice for beginners? You have just got to have the time and passion and commitment. I think it's incredibly important that you just, if you're really into it, you've really just got to be able to hone in on it. It's going to take time. I've just seen a lot of people that are just like, yeah, it just wasn't for me. And it was like, and people get mad about this. People get mad when people say, yeah, but you didn't try hard enough. And then they're like, yeah, I did. Well, I mean, maybe sometimes it's true, but a lot of times it's not. You could think, like, I remember there was some comic I saw, it was like, I've put so much hard work in, I don't know why it's not working and why it's working for you. And he's got like a trash can of just like rejected things and things that he's learned over time. And the other guy's like, yeah, man, that must be rough. And he's literally got like a volcano, so like a mountain size of just trashed failure, like just learning from that. That's the truth of it. You got to get to the point where you've got a mountain of that crap. Like, you've got to have a mountain behind you. But all of that said, I'm saying that to say, just stick with it, because actually music is awesome, and it's a lot easier to get into than people make you think. I've dealt with a lot of piano teachers, a lot of just, guitar teachers, just general like teachers that make it seem daunting. It shouldn't be that daunting. I've said this numerous times, but literally just figure out a couple chords and put them together, and you've written a song. If you just start singing some melody over it, it may be the worst song of all time, but you are now a songwriter. Congrats. And I'm serious. Like, that's all it takes to get into this. It's very, very easy. And then you just take it one step at a time. And it's so exciting, especially at the beginning. It's so exciting because you learn so much. in so many cool things. And you know, for me personally, it was incredibly exciting, especially early on with producing. Like I remember when I learned that if you did 2 stacks of vocals on a hard left, hard right, you got this really cool stereo effect, and that blew my mind. And then I was like, oh, so what can I do with this, right? So it's really it's just taking it one step at a time, but being really committed to it, and having the passion for it is so important. But it really shouldn't be daunting or hard to get into, because I really don't think it is. I think that music is, you know, it's something that I'll spend my life learning it. Like I will die and probably still could have figured out more stuff. But you know, even then, that's part of what makes it so fun. Is there's never I never want that. I sure hope there's never a peak. You know, I sure hope there's never a point in which I'm like, okay, I've learned everything, because then it just becomes not interesting. That's the fun of music. So yeah, time commitment, passion. Take it one step at a time. You learn something new every day, and that's the magic of it. And just have fun and understand that, you know, you don't need to know all this beautiful music theory the moment you walk into it just to be able to write something. That's absolutely not true. Again, you had a few notes on your keyboard that you like together. Maybe put those over a couple chords you just learned, and you've written a song. So, you know, I guess that's my very long version of what I might say to some beginners. So, for specials, do you think this theme will be made into bigger orchestrated versions like the breakout theme, or are bigger scores delegated to? I have no clue. I don't know. That is definitely, that's going to fall on Scott entirely. I really do not know. So we'll have to see. But I have no answer. A writer's block. I swear I get nothing down forever until I get that divine inspiration after hours of effing around on a piano. It's definitely inspiring hearing stuff like this. Yeah, again, it's like, a lot of times it's just the divine inspiration, and I'm speaking for a lot of composers and a lot of brilliant stuff that's come out from a lot of these really talented guys, where, you know, they just kind of had to push through. You know, it's not every piece that happens is this divine incredible, and it's great when that is what happens, because that's definitely some of my favorite stuff I've ever done. Is that specifically, is like, that stuff just hits me. I just get inspired and I write something and it's awesome, and I love that. That's my favorite thing, but that's not what always happens, and we can't sit around and wait for that to happen every time, you know, especially when time and money is on the table. So yeah, you know, a lot like, for anybody that's familiar, the Chadtronic anime thing that I did last year, I had to push through for that one. That was not one that I was just inspired and hit me and I just started. That was one of those that I really had to sit there and I had to like just kind of hit some notes on my piano and kind of just correlate things, listen to some stuff, reference stuff, get any sort of inspiration from other things that are like the music I was trying to create, and then I just had to push through. And you know, it ended up working out. I think the song ended up sounding great. But that was not one of those that was just like, boom, oh my gosh, I know exactly what this should sound like. I didn't. So yeah. All right, well, I should probably conclude. It's now been almost 2.5 hours of the stream, so I really need to call it. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, it's Scott the Woz G4. I guess I totally forgot to mention the master bus stuff, but you know, you could honestly probably watch one of my other streams breaking down stuff and you would get a very similar deal to this. I just real quick flashed in front of you what I used. I knew I was gonna forget something, but you know, I don't think it's you know, we can save that for another time. But yeah, anyway, that's the track. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. All right.